It's great. I'm about to ask you that question. I just wanted to note, I really love exactly what you're just saying, how we are all forced to act in this world. And it's scary, but that's the way that the world has been set up, that every decision we make does have infinite worth into the future. It does have an infinite amount of effects from the cause of every decision that we make. That's what I believe. There's something about that that's really kind of terrifying, but it's like the analogy in my mind that I've always used is like you've had a grenade in your hand and the pin's already pulled. And so say in an election, if you decide
Yeah.
not to vote for anybody,
Yeah.
that is a vote for another thing, which is not voting for any of the two parties or whatever. So generally speaking, do you think that there's wisdom in being involved in politics, or do you think there's more wisdom in just trying to be disinvolved, unplugging?
Yeah, no, good question. So I think it will depend in the time of history that you're born in, what country you're in. There's a lot of factors determining how to answer that question, but obviously I'll speak to kind of North America, kind of where we're based and kind of the world's oriented around right now. I think it's wise to intentionally engage, and not be afraid of making a wrong decision or I don't know all the answers. I don't know everything about everything, and it's too overwhelming. So I'm just going to choose not to engage. I think God asks us to engage in the world, even if it's hard, even if it's a lot of work sometimes, because as you say, every decision matters. Like the core of our faith is like free will is the core essence, and every decision we make will determine not just our life, and it'll affect our families' lives and culture's lives and generations into the future. So I think engaging is key for Christians, but I think that their worldview needs to understand that if you look through Scripture, God is supportive and for, and even champions people that are completely messed up. I mean, if you think about David. I mean, David, like, for Christians listening, I mean, he slept with a lot of people. He liked this one lady, saw her like, in the bath, and then he, offs her husband and puts him in the front line of the war so he can die, so then he can marry this, like, so David's like killing guys to sleep with their wives, and like he's not supposed to take the census thing. God like tells him not to, but he does it anyway, and that leads to thousands dying. Like, so David is a complete mess. If you look at him from a moral standpoint and like just kind of, is he a righteous man that I want to support and follow? You'd be like, if you lived in that time, if you had no discernment about what God was doing, you'd just be like, you'd look at him and be like, wow, I'm definitely not supporting that dude. He's a mess, and he's definitely, I'm for like one wife or whatever your beliefs are. So I think the role of a Christian is so much. You can't look at this outward appearance. You can't look at expecting everything on the surface to look good. You can't expect it. You have to be discerning what is God doing amidst the messiness, amidst the brokenness of humanity. That even when God said to Israel, I don't want you to have a king. He was speaking through the prophet Samuel. I don't want you to have a king. I don't want you to have a king. They're like, we want to have a king. We want to be like the other nations. We want a king. He's like, I don't want you to have a king. The reason I don't want you to have a king is this, and this. They'll take your people. They'll take your crops. They'll take 10% of this. Don't do it. It's bad. So as Christians, we would think, okay, if you disobeyed God, a very clear instruction, we would call that sin, walking in the wrong direction, walking towards death and destruction in your life. And then they're like, no, we want a king. And what does God do? He meets them where they're at in their broken humanity and essentially says, okay, you want a king? I'll help you find the best king out there. And he's a head above the rest. His name's Saul. He's of Kish. And he actually leads them to find someone to be their king. So with our current a lot of Christian worldview and thinking, it's like, well, if you disobey God, it's a sin, so then I can't be a part of it. Whereas God, he says, okay, this is where you're at. This is where humanity's at. They're broken. There's no good leaders, or there shouldn't even be a king right now. But this is where the people are at. We see this in that story. He comes down and through the prophet leads them to the best king available. So I think we need to understand that as Christians, even when we're raising children or whatever part of life, that we recognize we need to meet people where they're at and not expect them to be somewhere where they're not. And if they're not where we expect them to be, which is perfection a lot of the time, we can't just disengage and say, oh, that's tainted, that's dirty. If I support it, I'm supporting something that's anti-God, like having a king when you're supposed to have God as your king for Israel. So life's so messy, I've come to realize, and God works in that. And we are supposed to be the hands and feet of God on the earth as Christians. So we're supposed to get involved in the mess, even if it looks like we're supporting something that on the surface may look even evil, like David looked evil on the surface. So it's a complicated thing that requires a lot of discernment and wisdom and not being quick to judge.